Thanks. Hello, everyone. Hello, members' room. Let me set the stage for you with a bit of a scenario before we begin so that you might better understand why we in the Rare Book and Special Collections Division have been anticipating this day. Imagine this vast Jefferson Library entirely empty due to the pandemic, but for 2 or 3 Rare Book staff members who were quietly tucked away in the Rare Book vault. The space is enclosed, silent, dark except for the processing lamps on the table. There our intrepid staff unboxed and inventoried the numerous shipping crates that were filled with the Aramont collection. One breathtaking binding after another, a profound gathering of Joyce's Ulysses, the works of Miro, Picasso, and others, each eliciting gasps and squeals and begging the question, if a curator shrieks in an empty vault and no one hears them. So, good afternoon. Welcome to the Library of Congress. I'm Mark Demunation. I'm Chief of the Rare Book and Special Collections Division. We're very excited to have you here today. It's a very special day for us, and it is a day that has been a long time coming. We've waited through 2 years of pandemic and isolation in order to arrive at this moment where we can finally celebrate with you in person the arrival of the magnificent Aramont collection in the Rare Book and Special Collections Division here at the Library of Congress. This is an extraordinary gift to the nation, one for which we will be forever grateful, and one which we hope to introduce you to today. Stephanie Stillo, the Aramont curator, and Emily Moore, assistant curator, have created this event. They deserve all the praise and kudos. Showing true mettle in the face of some unavoidable obstacles, some of which you will no doubt hear about today, they've designed this symposium to offer you a full sense of the range and depth of this superb collection. On the one hand, a collector's collection, and on the other, a vast survey of modernism. All of the collection's elements, modernist literature and first editions, sets and series, livres d'artistes, and design bindings conspire together to help us better understand the making of the modern book. And its presence here elevates the vast holdings of the division as a whole. It has forever changed the nature of the Rare Book Division. As we move ahead, we will develop public programs that explore in depth the many facets of the Aramont collection. Today, we launch those conversations with this introduction, and we look forward to sharing this dialogue and experience with you in the future. So, welcome, welcome, and with that, I'm pleased to turn the program over to Stephanie Stillo.
Wonderful. My name is Stephanie Stillo. I am a curator in the Rare Book and Special Collections Division. Just got to make sure those are working. I curate both the Lessing J. Rosenwald collection, and I am lucky enough to also curate the Aramont Library. Obviously, my colleagues Mark Demunation and Emily Moore are very pleased to welcome everyone today to this room, as well as our participants in the members' room, to Making the Modern Book. So as Mark suggested, today is a special day for us in the Rare Book Division. Today is the day that we finally have the opportunity to gather together in person to celebrate the donation of the Aramont Library to the Library of Congress. This collection has been a singular inspiration to our division over the last several years. And this afternoon, I would like to begin by offering you a brief overview of the contents of the donation, as well as a few meditations on specific objects. We will then hear from a selection of scholars on various themes related to the Aramont Library. We do hope that you will join us this afternoon in the Whitall Pavilion for wine and appetizers, that you will take a stroll up to the second floor of the Great Hall for a large collection display, and engage in our discussion this evening on the topic of artists approach the book. So as you can see, we have a wonderful day planned out for you, and I hope that you will enjoy it as much as we enjoyed putting it together. Before we begin in earnest, I would like to take a few moments to extend our gratitude to the many people that brought us here today. I would like to thank the library's events office and visitor engagement for their extraordinary commitment to detail. As many of you know, we had to move this event last minute, and it was a Herculean effort to get all of you in your seats today. I am so glad you're here, but we moved a couple mountains with the help of specific people. Nichelle Wingfield, Mary Eno, and Katie Klinkle, thank you so much for being our allies in this process. A massive thank you to the multimedia group, specifically Latarsha Ballard and her wonderful team with Tom Nauer, without whom I am not ashamed to say we would be irrevocably lost. The driving force behind this event, this panel of speakers of the display is the Aramont Assistant Curator, Emily Moore. There are simply not enough words to thank Emily for all the work that she has done for us today, but when you see her around, I hope you do try to say thank you. Most importantly, I would like to thank the Aramont Foundation for their generous financial support to the Library of Congress as we continue to think about how the Aramont Library will guide us into the future. So let's begin. In early 2020, the Library of Congress joyfully welcomed the Aramont Library into the fold of the Rare Book and Special Collections Division. But as we will discuss momentarily with Gordon Hollis, the original curator of the Aramont Library, the collection's formation dates several decades prior. The Aramont Library began in the early 1980s with signed and inscribed first editions of modernist literature, a genre that critically explored topics such as alienation, disillusionment, and fragmentation in the industrial post-war West. These editions range from the poetry of Ezra Pound to the novels of William Faulkner, Ernest Hemingway, Virginia Woolf, and Willa Cather. The modern literature collection also holds several lovely surprises, such as first editions of Dr. Seuss's Cat in the Hat and Frank Baum's Wizard of Oz. You'll see many of these editions this afternoon, but none will be more undeniably grand than one of the three Aramont first editions of James Joyce's body stream of consciousness novel, Ulysses. One of the Aramont editions includes inscriptions, signed letters by Joyce, photographs, a rare copy of Joyce's 1920 schema, as well as a unique and unusual anatomical figure that faithfully corresponds to the structure of the book. We are very, very lucky today to have Patrick Hastings here to help us through this most unusual copy. The heart of the Aramont Library is a thoughtful assemblage of illustrated books that span from the late 18th to the 20th century. This corpus of material reveals the exciting but often overlooked role of painters, sculptors, and architects as book illustrators and visual storytellers. The Aramont Library begins its exploration of illustration with the most important Spanish painter and graphic artist of the 18th and 19th century, Francisco Goya. Living in Spain, Goya witnessed both extravagance and intense conflict. He was painter to the royal court, witnessed the French Revolution, ran afoul of the Inquisition, endured the violent invasion of Spain by Napoleon, as well as the turbulent renewal of Spanish rule under the absolutist king, Ferdinand VII. Many of Goya's prints leveled piercing critiques of the world around him. His two most famous series, both in the Aramont Library, are Los Caprichos, a visual critique of the hypocrisy and foolishness of the Spanish royal court, and Los Desastres de la Guerra, a graphic and disturbing expose about the horrors of the Peninsular War. So to honor these donations to the library, the Rare Book Division recently purchased a copy of Tauromaquia, one of Goya's many bullfighting series. Goya completed this Tauromaquia series over a 2-year period, from 1815 to 1816. A child of the Enlightenment and a student of Romanticism, Goya used the image of man and bull locked in violent conflict as a powerful visual allegory about the consequences of man's hubris when faced with the raw, violent, and uncontrolled power of nature, certainly a hallmark characteristic of the Romantic style, both in art and literature. The Aramont Library also reflects important artistic watersheds in the late 19th century, moments that foreshadow a budding fascination with abstract or non-representational art in Europe and later America. During this time, artists known as the Nabi or the prophets became less concerned with exact or accurate representation and far more intrigued by the visualization of light and atmosphere, symbol, and emotion. An example of this in book illustration is the 1893 publication of The Voyage of Urienne by André Gide, with color lithographs by Nabi artist Maurice Denis. Gide's deeply symbolist novel follows a group of friends as they embark on a dreamlike journey through the physical and spiritual realms of human existence. Their ship transports the dwindling cadre of travelers through three unique and perplexing realms: the enchanted islands of sensual enticement, the languid, marshy waters of self-reflection, and a stark Arctic expanse that eventually points to the divine. Matching the purposeful, austere characterization of the story's primary protagonist, Denis employed similarly minimalist image compositions. The artist abandoned complicated, detailed illustrations in favor of abstracted shadows, unarticulated facial expressions, and ethereal landscapes. Employing an equally minimalist palette, Denis used muted, overlapping colors to delineate the transition of the ship from the shores of one unique realm to the next. For example, the warm ochre that guided the travelers through the tropical islands of temptation and consequence eventually gave way to the search for meaning in the cold blue of a vast and lonely Arctic. The largesse of the Aramont Library also allows us to track the visual treatment of authors through the creative lens of different artists in different periods. Some of the earliest examples in the Aramont Library surround the work of Oscar Wilde. In the late 19th century, Art Nouveau, an aesthetic defined by a preference for the sensual, wild, and unkempt, shaped the appearance of everything from commercial advertising to furniture design until the start of World War I. The graphic art of the period is best represented in the Aramont Library by the illustrations of Aubrey Beardsley. In 1894, Beardsley created illustrations for the English translation of Oscar Wilde's play about the biblical femme fatale, Salome. Wilde's play, by the same name, dramatized an evening of carnal desire that concluded in the decapitation of the itinerant prophet, John the Baptist. Banned from stage performances until 1896, Beardsley's illustrations offered the play its first visual performance through fantastic and erotic imagery that skillfully elucidated Wilde's story of female domination, sexual desire, and ultimately death. A little over 30 years later, in 1926, we find the work of Oscar Wilde deeply engulfed in the clean, simple, and geometric forms of Art Deco. Just as a fun aside, all of these examples of Art Deco can be found in our Adams building, which if you have not been there, it is exquisite. It was in the hands of Francois-Louis Schmid, one of the most important and recognizable Art Deco painter engravers of the 20th century, that we find this stunning treatment. At the height of his success, Schmid created original color wood engravings for what would become one of his most famous books, an illustrated edition of Two Tales by Oscar Wilde, which included The Happy Prince and The Rose. Two Tales was a masterful work with sharp geometric illustrations, vignettes, and an elaborately decorative band that signaled the shift from one story to the next. Schmid's bold illustrations filled with vibrant colors and shimmering gold leap off of the page, making easy comparisons with the glimmer and grace of illuminated manuscripts. The Aramont Library also holds an impressive assemblage of livres d'artistes, or books by artists of the late 19th and 20th centuries. And to this, we are very grateful for the expertise of Adrienne Legendre, who will be offering us a longer history of these books later this afternoon. This corpus of material is especially intriguing, at least to me, because it reminds us of artists' deep and meaningful engagement with literature and poetry. They also represent the vastly understudied collision of modern art movements, such as post-impressionism, Fauvism, Cubism, and Surrealism, with the written word. So one of my personal favorites is from 1926. It's an illustrated edition of Le Chef-d'œuvre inconnu, the unknown masterpiece, by 19th century realist poet Henri de Balzac. Art publisher Ambrose Villard commissioned Pablo Picasso to create a suite of etchings to commemorate the centenary of the unknown masterpiece, and the result is a beguiling mixture of Balzac's 19th century realism and Picasso's 20th century notions of artistic inspiration, creation, and obsession. The unknown masterpiece follows a fictional master painter by the name of Fraunhofer as he attempts to capture perfect female beauty. As one might anticipate in the work of Balzac, the painter's search for perfection slowly descends into madness, obsession, and eventually tragedy. Picasso's etching for the suite of prints that accompany Balzac's prose are rendered in simple neoclassical style, indicative of his larger graphic production for Villard in the late 1920s and 1930s. Picasso's simplicity of form is particularly powerful in the image of the painter and the model knitting. In the image, Fraunhofer's densely tangled, indecipherable painting is brought to the fore by the stark contrast with the sketch-like figure of the artist and his model. Villard's publication of Les Chefs-d'œuvre inconnu also included 56 line and dot drawings that Picasso sketched between the years of 1924 and 1926. The almost completely abstracted drawings serve as a non-textual introduction to Balzac's text. Villard also integrated 67 Cubist wood engravings designed by Picasso. The overarching theme in Picasso's illustrations for Les Chefs-d'œuvre inconnu, studio practice, the relationship between artists and models, abstraction versus reality, came to dominate the artist's graphic oeuvre for the following decade, demonstrating the influence of these publications on an artist's larger body of work. Now, many of the illustrated books in the Livre d'Artistes in the Aramont Library are enclosed in bespoke bindings that meditate on the major themes of the text or the visual contribution of the artist. Like the books themselves, many of these objects date back to the 19th century. For example, the Aramont Library demonstrates how the arts and crafts movement held a special significance for bookbinders. From the bejeweled bindings of Sangorski and Sutcliffe to the intricate pointelle patterns of Dove's bindery, binders of the late 19th and early 20th century challenged the mass production of commercial binders by crafting customized binding for everything from single books to multi-volume sets. More modern examples abound in the Aramont Library and humble us with their beauty and thoughtfulness. For example, Rose Adler's binding for Jean Cocteau's The Human Voice used an assemblage of dyed leather and abalone shells to depict a large rotary phone, a gesture to Cocteau's emotionally charged narrative about a suicidal woman on the phone with her former lover. I would be remiss if I did not mention that the Aramont Library holds no less than 6 bindings by Paul Bonet, one of the most celebrated French binders of the 20th century. We are honored to have contemporary bookbinder Gabby Cooksey here with us today to discuss her own exhibition bindings, all of which are singular and arresting works of art in their own right. So this has been a brief preview of what you will see today. It is my hope that we will conclude our time together with a simple reminder that books are deceivingly complicated objects, that everything they contain, both inside and out, reflect the prevailing desire and demand of a particular historical moment, sometimes multiple moments and multiple desires. The books in the Aramont Library forcefully remind us that we cannot deny books their complexities, their many faces. Books are dialogues, they are requiems, they're rebellions, but most importantly, they're personal invitations to explore, to interpret, to meditate. It is in the spirit of curiosity that we welcome you to the Library of Congress for Making the Modern Book. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Emily Moore, Assistant Curator to the Aramont Library, to introduce our first speaker, Gordon Hollis.
Hello. Okay, good. This is on. I'm Emily Moore. As Stephanie mentioned, I have the very good fortune of being the assistant curator of the Aramont Library. I've been at the library for just about 2 years, and this collection just continues to astound and challenge me. I am very happy to be joined on stage by Gordon Hollis. Gordon is the owner of Golden Legend Books in Los Angeles, and he is also the original curator of the collection. And Gordon, welcome. Yeah. So it's a really special moment for all of us to get to be on stage, sort of passing the baton, so to speak, around this collection. But Gordon, you were there at the very beginning. So tell us a little bit about the genesis of the Aramont some 40 years ago.
Starting in 1982. Can I do it without? Can you hear me without this? No, not really. Right, members are right. Stephanie mentions in the introduction that this collection reflects a collector's pursuit of the perfect balance between book design, illustration, and binding. That vision and that interest is the work of Geronimo Arango Arias, the owner and spirit of this collection. He was not himself a book collector, although his brothers certainly are, but he was a businessman who loved art and beautiful books. In every house he owned, he had a wonderful library. And I'd never met a man who loved books quite so much as Geronimo. I'm not going to tell you much about him except his book collecting habits, because he wanted his privacy. Anyhow, I was working at a bookshop in Los Angeles in 1982, and this very nice gentleman came in named Geronimo, and he wanted to buy some first editions for his children. And over the next couple of years at the bookshop or at book fairs or elsewhere, we would meet, and we formed a relationship that's quite special for the rare book world. It's a matter of trust. If I say the book is worth $1,000, he has no idea what it's worth. What is to possess him to spend that kind of money? He develops a trust, as the booksellers, Adrian, others will tell you, you have to develop this kind of a trust. So we did that. And at one point he said to me, Gordon, I'm thinking of starting a bookshop in Los Angeles. Would you like to help me do that? And since I was working with, by the way, I'm a refugee from the sinking of the PhD programs in the 70s. The secretary of the English department at the University of Chicago said, well, yeah, you can take a PhD, but you'll never get a job. And I think I'd still be trying to. But anyhow, so I was vulnerable in the early 80s, was a terrible recession. So I took Geronimo seriously. And we talked about it, and I will tell you now what he was interested in. Stephanie mentioned this.
Here, we're going to want to keep you on the mic just so our folks in the members room can hear you.
Yeah, that's right. Let me just find out what I'm supposed to remember. He was interested in three elements, and this was from the beginning of 1980s until he passed away 2 years ago. Modern first editions, 1850s to 1950s. Hardy to a little bit before Hardy, Wilde, and actually by Thoreau, all the way through James Joyce and Hemingway and Steinbeck, and there are many copies inscribed and otherwise of novels by these authors in the collection. Since that was my field, I knew a little bit about it, and I thought I could help him, because the collecting field of modern first editions simply follows education of the colleges. English language literature teaches, from Chaucer all the way to the late 20th century, but the 19th and 20th century, there's very well-known figures who are taught. starting with Robert Browning, even before that, going through to James Joyce, through all of the modern authors. So this was his area of interest. These can be collected in their first editions, in their original dust jackets, inscribed or not. Geronimo, however, was as interested in the book if it was beautifully bound as if it had a $50,000 dust jacket. Just think of Esquire magazine or Gentleman's Quarterly and a big full-page ad of a gentleman sitting at his desk with a library of beautiful bindings in the background. This was an ad for many years. We never know what those are, but for Geronimo, those were the first editions of modern authors. He was interested, secondly, in beautiful bindings. He didn't know much about them, and I knew even less. In the 1980s, unlike 10, 20 years ago, it was possible to find beautiful leather-bound in goatskin, vellum, leather, otherwise, bindings in a variety of places at book fairs and bookshops and at auction. And this included some of the real treasures of the Aramont collection, early American, by say early, I mean end of the 19th century, early American designer book bindings. These are rare. And they're so rare, it's really very difficult even to find out who the binders are in some cases. So without a great deal of expertise, we both said, yeah, they're beautiful, we love them, let's buy them. And so we did. And so we did. And this continued all the way through our 35-year relationship together. He did not want to specialize in fine bindings. This is not his overall interest. The overall interest was literature, but if it's beautifully bound, all the better. To tell you a quick story, he did not have The Great Gatsby in his collection. Now, The Great Gatsby is probably the single most expensive modern first edition on the market. In the dust jacket, in a nice dust jacket, it's over $100,000. So he wasn't interested in that. He bought a beautiful copy at Asprey's of London in blue, full blue Morocco, a first edition, and this thrilled him. So the second element of his interest was the finely bound book. And there's any number of them in every category of his library. The last category, tell me when I'm...
Oh, it's okay.
He was interested in illustrated books, in particular, the Livre d'Artiste, which is, as you mentioned, Stephanie mentioned, a book that's illustrated, but not with photo reproduced pictures, but with original etchings, engravings, literature, lithographs, and so forth, lino cuts, whatever. And this was really a great art form of artists and authors to work together, especially in France during the 20th century. And so we set out to learn about this field. And over the course of 40 years, I flew to Paris any number of times, which is great for me. You know, Air France, whatever, I'll go and buy these things. Hilarious story, I'll tell it very quickly, was in the early 2000s, I went to France and spent about $80,000 on a group of bindings that I thought would make him happy. We looked at the catalog, as we always did. I never bought a book that he didn't know about or he didn't approve. So we worked together quite closely, and this is the nature of being a curator in this kind of a collection. I was an advisor as much as I knew, or I would find out the information. If he wanted to know the value of this book, I would find out at the beginning of the 80s as best I could from the other auction houses and dealers. And then as more information came online, it became easier to evaluate books. This was a particular interest. Anyhow, I went to France for about any number of time, and I bought these books. And the auctioneer, it was Blaiseau, for those French, Georges Blaiseau, I think, for the French dealers, said, why don't you take them? Just take them, we'll send you a bill, because he dealt with me. This never happens in France. I mean, this cannot happen. When you buy something in France to import, you leave it there, you get yourself a customs broker, he pays the fees, he does all the paperwork, then they import it, and then they inspect it when they get to California or wherever. So George just said, take them, which presented me with a problem. How do I pay taxes on these things? You know, how do I get them through customs? So I went out and got another suitcase, and I got to Charles de Gaulle, and I went through what's called export, whatever it is where you show the contents of your belongings as you exit. And the customs agent there opened the suitcase. And I said, I wonder what a French jail is like. So what happens is truly remarkable, and Geronimo was thrilled by this. She went and called every other custom agent on the floor over. And they unzipped these Paul Bonet bindings, and they looked at them carefully, and what does she say? Splendide, magnifique. She zipped them back up, sent me on my way. And I almost had a stroke. We finally paid all the dues and customs, of course, when we got here, but that's one of the many stories. I could spend the whole evening talking about bookseller stories.
You know, it's interesting, Gordon, hearing you talk about your relationship with the original collector, and I'm so curious about how you understand yourself in the formation of the Aramont. Do you see yourself as a dealer? Do you see yourself as a curator? What word would you choose?
I was not either.
Okay, great.
I was an advisor. I was an advisor. I never sold her. I'm a bookseller, and when we had a business on Melrose Avenue in Los Angeles trying to sell these things. But he ended up wanting to buy them all himself, so I didn't do very well as Lucy understands what he said. And he said to me, when we broke up our partnership, he said, Gordon, you buy books very well, but you're not really able to sell them. And so I was very flattered when he said, I'd like you to help me build a collection of these kinds of books, which we did. As far as being a curator, he brought in auction catalogs himself, or dealers' catalogs from Quaritch through Sims Reed, through other booksellers we worked with, and he said, what about this, what about this, what about this? And we would spend the afternoon going through them. I would go and look at the prices, and I would go look at the books. You have to kick the tires. You cannot buy a multi-thousand-dollar book without examining it. People try, but they can't do it. So one other point about working with Geronimo, he was interested in value. And so he taught over the years, this was over 3 decades worth of work, he thought about giving them to his children, he thought about selling them when he was gone. He ended up just loving them, but he wanted to know what these things are worth. And do I have time to tell a quick fabulous story?
I think I know which one you're going to tell.
The one about the caprichos? So he has a copy of Goya's Caprichos in the collection, one of the great works of late 18th century art. And it has an original binding, one of like, Adrian, were there 25 or 200 or something like that?
27.
27 with a contemporary binding. And I knew him for a while. And so this was a book that historically had been selling from the 1990s for $200,000, which is a lot of money. And I just kept track of the values, 200,000, 220, 270, whatever. One copy came up for auction, I think it was at Christie's, sold for $800,000. And so I called the head of Christie's book department, and I said, Francis, how do you explain this? It's a $200,000 book. And Francis says, not anymore. Apparently, a person who is not part of our community, not in the library world, not a curator, not a bookseller, not a collector, just decided to invest some of his oil money or wherever it was And he paid whatever you, sometimes with a rare book you don't have much choice. And you're going to talk about Joyce's Ulysses. The last issue of Joyce's Ulysses falls into this category. So other than that, I just worked with him. I adored him. I think it's one of the great experiences of my life to have a close relationship with him, to know his family. I still know his family. It just is something that sometimes happens in the rare book world, the rare arts world, where you form a bond of trust. But this went on for quite a while, and I miss him terribly. He was one of the really great spirits of book collecting.
So, Stephanie, I'm going to ask you this question as well, even though you kind of already answered it. But Gordon, if you had to choose one book in the collection as your favorite in just this minute, not outside. No pressure. No pressure.
I can't do it.
Not even one?
I'm too close to it. I mean, I love them. Love them all. There's one by Dorothea bound by Dorothea Tanning.
Yep.
He didn't like it so much.
Renee Crevel. And Dorothea
Renee
Tanning.
Crevel, yeah.
Yeah.
He didn't like it so much. What can I do?
Well, I love it.
But that's probably my favorite. You see things,
Yeah.
especially in the livre d'artiste field, you never see anywhere else. It's a remarkable form of book that no longer, I mean, you have artist books too, and you have designer binders who, as you'll find, who work with these beautiful books. But that period, 1900 to 1950, Bonnard through Joyce, was probably the greatest since the 17th, 18th century of French bookmaking to do this kind of thing.
Well, you'll be glad to know that the tanning is part of the display this evening, so you will be able to see it. Steph, what about you? If you had to, I know you already said the Balzac, but if you were going to do a different one.
Gordon, can I borrow your mic? You know, it's interesting when these kinds of collections come in. You know, Mark Domination and I have worked together for a very long time, and you know, we talk about our early islands of comfort, right? Of that you just gravitate towards a specific book, and sometimes you don't really know why, and that's okay, right? That you don't really know why, because I think you come to know why later. And one of the first books that I've never been able to sort of extract myself from is Joan Miro's Constellations, that have sort of beautiful poussoir reproductions of his original Constellation series that he created during World War II. And there's such a beautiful story behind those particular images, which you will see this evening. You know, there's a moment in World War II where these artists are dispersed and they are struggling, and a lot of their work is being burned, right? And there's these stories of Miro having to flee specific areas, and the only thing that he would take with him would be his canvases, right? Would be the constellations. And he had so little at that point that he said that his only inspiration could be the night sky, right? And that's why it's called Constellations. And, you know, there's this beautiful moment in the 50s after the war is over, and Miro is invited to the United States by the son of Matisse, and they display Constellations in New York, right? And it's seen as this moment that art had survived, right? That creativity had sort of survived the war. And the sort of beautiful part of this is that our copy of Constellations is accompanied with original poetry by André Breton, who is a wonderful surrealist poet. And it becomes this kind of dialogue between word and image, right? And it becomes this moment of sort of interpretation, of reverence, of recognition, you know, between both an artist and an author, and between sort of art and text. And this is something that I think the Aramont Library does so well, is that it brings these moments together, right, in ways that are unexpected, that are unique. They're just surprising. So I think I've never been able to leave constellations, and I don't know if I ever will, right? And it's one of those, again, it's one of those things that you learn why over the years, and I'm still learning why. Yeah.
I can add a little bit to this. We bought Constellation in 1982 when the field of the livre d'artiste was just developing. And as a matter of fact, there was no place in all of California where you could buy these things. There were a few dealers in New York, Ursus Books and H.P. Krauss and others, but nothing in California. So I walked into, we were working together to build this collection. I walked into the bookshop of Jake Zeitlin. You may have heard of him if you're a book collector. He was the dean of bookshops in the United States, really, and especially in California. And he had this copy of Constellation. He did not know what it was worth. No one was interested in buying it. I walked up and said, "We'll buy it. Make me a price," because it was. I didn't know what it was either, but I knew it would fit right in the scheme of what we were doing. This has multiple suites, as I recall, not just the book, but it came out. Books like this came out in with variants, a few of which had double suites of all the illustrations, and I think this has a triple suite. And so it sat there in Zeitlin's store for quite a while, and I finally went back and said, "Okay, Jake, how much?" And he said, $5,000. And I said, "Sold." And I bought it, and it stayed in that collection forever, and it's really one of the highlights. We have, are there 20 Miro books in that collection?
Sounds about right.
It sounds, I say we, I was closely, there are 20 books with original art by Miro in the Aramont collection. It's unequal. For a long time, the Aramont collection, the Bonet collection, the Arango collection, whatever you want to call it, was unequaled in the United States for this kind of book.
And was Constellations the first Miro that was purchased?
No, I don't.
I don't expect you to have to remember all of it.
No, I say that I recommended all the books, but I did not. He would bring in something like Matisse's Jazz or Goya's Capriccios. And from the Vendel sale in Paris in 1982, he brought 3 or 4 books, one of which was Ubu Roy, I think, unless I've forgotten, a beautiful Miro book, a beautiful book with a text by who wrote?
Jerry.
Albert Jarry, illustrated by Miro. It's just dramatic and gorgeous.
Mm-hmm. So when we sort of step back, and I think we'll start with Emily on this question, and then we'll sort of move through, but when we step back and we look at this collection in its entirety, it's a big collection, and so it's a big entirety, right? What do we see? Is this a collection that addresses sort of modern Western creativity? What does it capture for you in a moment? And I think that this is a question that doesn't have a definite answer. And I think that is what good collections sometimes do, right? Is they leave you sort of wondering, right? Of what kind of pulls these together in specific ways. And that's part of the process of us living with this collection. Mm-hmm. So Emily, as the sort of newest curator to this collection, what do you see?
Well, it is kind of constantly changing, to be honest. The collection it's so dynamic, and there's so many different facets to it that you really have to kind of go back to it over and over again. My background is in art history and cinema, so I definitely come at it from that lens. And that's how I first sort of entered, particularly the livre d'artiste material. I actually see it as very cinematic in that it kind of operates on these different sensory levels. It's almost synesthetic in that way. And you're right, it's a very Western-centric collection, and I think in that way it really captures European modernism beautifully, as well as the American modernism that took place, particularly in the interwar period. I've learned a lot from working with it in terms of really learning how far back those modernist roots really go. So we can go back to Goya, we can go back to John Donne, those are parts of this collection. So we think about the majority of the material being 19th, 20th century, but it actually goes all the way back to the mid-17th, which is pretty profound when you're looking at these really modern materials to think about those deep, deep, deep roots. So I do see it as a modern collection. I see it as sort of the embodiment of a community of practice, of the artists that are in it, sort of the environment that these books are created in, and then certainly the vision of the collector. It's such a unique group of books. The 1,700 volumes cover everything, so you really get that sense of the original collector and what his interests were, which is fascinating.
What about you, Gordon?
Geronimo never said he had a discrete collection. I think to the end of his days, he just said, I love these books, these are beautiful. I want my family to appreciate them, but they're really something very personal to me. Now, he did restrict his acquisitions to the 3 areas I've mentioned, but he went off into other areas too. For example, Hispanic literature. There's novels by Figueres, by the great Spanish and South American authors. And then he went off into another tangent, and the New York Public, I say it's a tangent, but it's 40 years, you do different things. I personally fell in love with the livre d'artiste, and the only problem is each book costs $15,000, $20,000, so it kind of limits your love affair.
Unless you become a rare book librarian, and then you get to touch them all.
So, but he went off into other areas. For example, the New York Public Library published a book called Great Books of the 20th Century. They did it in 1999. He said, let's collect all of these. And Cat in the Hat, which cost $12,000, was in there. So I got this thing for him, and he said, it cost what? So you weren't alone, but this was part of that corpus, that collection. So, and he went off into other areas as well. You would not believe what we just went through with the remaining books, not in the Bonet Aramont Library, but that were just sitting in his home in Brentwood. There are hundreds and hundreds of books on Spanish art and literature and all sorts of other things. I just can't be impressed enough with his love of the physical book, of the beautifully bound book, of the interesting illustrated book. And he never said, this is my collection. He just bought them, he liked them, and then we'll do something else.